If you're here for storytelling, you'll get it. If you're here for ancient history, you'll get that too. And if you're here for both, well, that's exactly what this list is about. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 incredible stories from the ancient world. But just a quick reminder though, please drop a like, hit subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It's how you tell YouTube that you want more and how we get to keep making it for you. Alright, with that being said, let's go. 25. The Raven That Got a Roman Funeral. Pliny the Elder told a story about a raven that wandered into a cobbler's shop one day. The shoemaker raised it and taught it to talk. Eventually, the bird would fly into the center of Rome every morning, greet the emperor by name, greet the crowd, and then head back home. People loved it, and the cobbler's shop became a local landmark. But the rival shoemaker down the street couldn't handle it. Sick of all the attention, he killed the bird, saying it had messed on his shoes. Biggest mistake of his life. The people of Rome drove him out and put him to death. The raven, though, got a funeral like no animal ever had. The streets filled with people, flowers rained down, its body was carried in procession, and it was buried in a tomb. 24. The Dolphin Who Loved a Boy. The ancient writer Arion had a soft spot for animal stories, and one of the strangest he told was about an unlikely friendship between a dolphin and a boy. The boy lived in the town of Xerxes. After working out one day, he cooled off with a swim in the sea. That's when a dolphin noticed him, and for whatever reason, kept coming back. From then on, the animal showed up daily, waiting offshore for their swim. Before long, crowds gathered just to watch the boy climb onto its back and ride across the waves. For a while, it looked like the perfect cross-species bond, but tragedy struck. One day, the boy was exhausted after swimming and slumped forward, in the process getting pierced by the dolphin's fin. The story claims that the dolphin refused to go on, dragging itself onto land to die next to him. Their bodies were buried together, and the tale became one of the strangest stories ever told. 23. Polycrates and the Ring. According to Horatius, Polycrates, the tyrant of Samos, seemed untouchable. Every war he fought went his way. His fortune only grew, and luck never left his side. It was so uncanny that even the pharaoh of Egypt, Amasis, warned him that his luck wouldn't last forever, and advised him to sacrifice something he valued most to balance the scales before the gods stepped in. So, Polycrates sailed out to sea and hurled his prized emerald ring into the waves, satisfied that his offering would keep disaster at bay. Days later, a fisherman delivered a giant fish to the palace. The cooks cut it open and impossibly found the ring inside. Instead of relief, it was taken as a bad omen. Amasis broke off their alliance immediately, convinced that disaster was closing in. Soon after, the Persian governor lured Polycrates across the sea, seized him, and had him executed. 22. Gyges and the King's Wife. King Candulus of Lydia was obsessed with his wife's beauty, and he wouldn't shut up about it. He bragged so much that he finally told his bodyguard Gyges, "If you don't believe me, just watch her undress." That's not exactly a request you can say yes to without things getting messy, and Gyges begged him not to go through with it. But Candulus pushed, and Gyges ended up hiding in the bedroom. Sure enough, the queen noticed. She didn't scream or call him out though. She waited until the next day and gave Gyges a brutal choice: kill the king and take the throne with her, or die on the spot for what he'd seen. Faced with that, Gyges chose to live. That night, the queen slipped him a knife, and when Candulus was asleep, Gyges struck. He took the throne, married the queen, and launched a new dynasty. 21. Taputti and the Birth of Chemistry. There are quite a few incredible women on today's list, and one of them was a woman who lived in Mesopotamia over 3,000 years ago named Taputti. A clay tablet from the Middle Assyrian period described her as a perfumer and palace overseer, leading a team of women who spent their days coming up with fragrances for the royal court. Taputti used the kind of methods that wouldn't look out of place in a lab today: infusion, maceration, filtration, and even an early form of distillation. She boiled plants and roots in water, cooled them down, separated the vapors, and refined them step by step into perfumes, quote, fit for a king. She basically laid the foundation for how we extract, refine, and create chemicals to this day. 20. Croesus and the Oracle. If you cross the Halys River, a great empire will fall. That's what the Oracle of Delphi told Croesus, king of Lydia. Simple, clear, and just vague enough to destroy him. Croesus took it as the go-ahead to launch an attack on Persia. He marched his forces across the river straight into the path of Cyrus the Great. When the war was over, Sardis was burned, Lydia was gone, and the empire that fell wasn't Persia, it was Croesus' own. To this day, the story gets quoted as the ultimate cautionary tale about asking the right question, because he technically got the truth. He just didn't ask whose empire the oracle was talking about. 19. The gold-digging ants. Herodotus didn't just write about kings and battles. He also filled his histories with the strange and unbelievable things he heard along the way, like the story about giant ants digging up gold in the desert near India. As the story goes, these creatures tunneled through the sand, leaving behind mounds laced with flakes of gold. Hunters on camelback would swoop in, scoop up the sand, and try to ride off before the ants noticed. Everyone dismissed the story as pure myth until explorers visited the Deosai Plateau in Pakistan and met the Monaro people. They'd long collected gold-rich sand from Himalayan marmot burrows. Today, people don't hunt gold via marmots anymore, at least not widely, but the local tales helped scholars to reinterpret Herodotus' giant ants as misheard marmots, not monsters. 18. Hypatia of Alexandria. In the 4th century CE, Alexandria was still the place to be if you cared about knowledge. Its library, its scholars, its reputation, everything was unmatched. And right in the middle of it all was a woman teaching math, philosophy, and astronomy at a time when women weren't supposed to have a voice in any of that. Hypatia spoke in public, wore the robes of a scholar, and people came from all over just to listen to her. But Alexandria was changing. Pagan traditions were being pushed aside as Christianity gained power. Hypatia was still a pagan. Worse, she was seen as an ally of Orestes, the Roman governor locked in a bitter feud with the city's bishop, Cyril. That made her a target. In 415, a mob dragged her from her carriage into a church and murdered her with roof tiles. Her death showed every scholar that free thought in Alexandria was no longer safe. 17. Cyrus the Great's miraculous survival. Cyrus the Great was born a prince. His grandfather, Astyages, had a nightmare that his future grandson would overthrow him. So when Cyrus arrived, Astyages ordered his servants to have him killed. But fate, or compassion, intervened. The baby was handed off to a herdsman who raised him as his own. For years, he lived in secret, far from the palace. Then, at 10, he and other children were playing king, and Cyrus ordered a disobedient noble's son punished. Word got back to Astyages, who demanded to see the bold boy for himself. When Cyrus stood before him, the king realized he was no herdsman's child. Pressed for answers, the shepherd confessed the truth. The boy was the grandson Astyages had tried to erase. Instead of executing him, the king had a change of heart. He returned Cyrus to his real parents, Cambyses and Mandane, and let him grow up at court. What he didn't realize that was by sparing the boy, he had set the prophecy in motion. Years later, Cyrus would overthrow him and take the throne. 16. Darius and the demand for earth and water. When Darius of Persia wanted the Greek city-states under his thumb, he didn't start with soldiers. He started with a gesture. His envoys went from city to city asking for a token of submission, a gift of earth and water. Many states handed it over without a fight, knowing they were no match for the empire. Athens and Sparta were different. In Athens, the demand was met with open contempt. The Persian envoys were seized and hurled into a pit usually reserved for criminals. Some Athenians, like Themistocles, even argued they should be executed for insulting the Greek tongue with their barbarian commands. Sparta's answer was shorter and clearer. When the Persians demanded earth and water, the Spartans pointed to a well. If the messengers wanted water, they could climb down and take it for themselves. The envoys were shoved in, and Persia had its answer. 15. The cross-dressing assassins. Not every Greek ruler rejected the Persian envoys. Amyntas, king of the Macedonians, gave Darius exactly what he asked for, earth and water. He even welcomed the Persians with a lavish banquet. Guests enjoyed themselves, but then pushed for more. In Persia, they said it was custom for wives and concubines to join the feast and entertain. Amyntas explained that Macedonian women didn't mingle that way, but finally gave in. The women appeared, but they sat apart, as was their custom. The Persians then demanded that the women sit closer and started groping them. Amyntas' son Alexander, not the Great, got angry and asked his father to retire for the night so that he could handle it. Once Amyntas left, Alexander promised the Persians that they could sleep with the women later after sobering up. But instead of sending women, he disguised a few beardless young men, armed them with daggers, and sent them in. When the Persians reached for them, the knives came out, and every single man was cut down on the spot. 14. A faithful dog. People always love stories about loyal dogs. Just think Greyfriars Bobby or the famous Hachiko. The Romans were no different. They adored their animals and even built marble tombs for them. So tales of devoted dogs were collected all over. One of the most memorable ones we found was of a dog that stayed with its owner even after he'd been executed for treason. Titius Sabinus was executed under Emperor Tiberius for treason. Like other criminals, his body was left on the steps where the condemned were thrown. His dog never left his side. It lay beside the corpse, whining pitifully, and when the crowd tossed it pieces of bread, the animal carried the food to its master's mouth as if trying to feed him. When Sabinus' body was later dragged off and flung into the river, the dog went in after it and brought it back toward the bank in one last attempt to save him. That kind of image doesn't fade, which explains why it became part of Roman memory. 13. The first author in history. Archaeologists have discovered thousands of cuneiform tablets over the years. And thanks to them, we know that one of our earliest writers was a woman named Eduana. She lived around 2300 BCE and was a princess, a priestess, and a poet. She was also the daughter of Sargon of Akkad, the man who conquered half the region and built one of the first empires. He gave her the powerful title of En, usually reserved for high lords, and put her in charge of the city of Ur as its chief priestess. Most of what she wrote was hymns to the gods, especially Inanna, but some were about her own struggles. For example, after Sargon's death, she was forced out of her temple and wrote, "He has turned that temple, whose attractions were inexhaustible, whose beauty was endless, into a destroyed temple. While he entered before me as if he was a partner, really, he approached out of envy," which is quite beautiful. She did eventually return to power, and her poems continued to be copied and recited in Mesopotamia for centuries after her death. 12. Arion and the Dolphin. Arion of Lesbos was a famous bard and lyre player in the 7th century BCE. After a wildly successful tour in Italy, he set sail for home with his riches. Unfortunately for him, though, his own crew turned greedy. Knowing he was about to be killed, Arion asked for one last favor: to sing before he died. So he dressed in his robes, played a final hymn, and then leapt overboard. The sailors thought that was the end of it. But according to Horatius, a dolphin, drawn by the music, surfaced and carried Arion all the way to shore. Later, when those same sailors arrived in Corinth, claiming Arion was dead, they were exposed when he walked in alive. Periander the ruler had them seized, and Arion's rescue became legendary enough to earn him a bronze statue riding a dolphin. 11. Xerxes Punishes the Sea. Despite ruling the largest empire on Earth, Darius never managed to conquer Greece. After his failure, he withdrew, and the job fell to his son Xerxes. Xerxes gathered another enormous army for the invasion, but this time he tried something new. Rather than ferry his troops over in small batches, he built a bridge of boats across the Hellespont, which separates Asia from Europe. The boats were lashed together with papyrus ropes so they could rise and fall with the waves. It looked impressive, but just as the army prepared to cross, a storm tore through and broke the whole thing apart. Xerxes lost it. He commanded that the Hellespont be whipped 300 times and chained with iron fetters. He then asked his men to plunge red-hot irons into the strait to mark its punishment. The engineers who built the bridge, however, did not get off so easily. They were executed. 10. Zopyrus' sacrifice. There are spy stories, and then there are spy stories. Among the most brutal ones is the story of a Persian nobleman named Zopyrus. During a revolt in Babylon, Darius I was stuck outside the city walls, unable to break in. So Zopyrus came up with a plan so extreme, it shocked even the Persians. He cut off his own nose and ears, flogged his body, and went to the Babylonians. To them, he looked like a man who had suffered horribly at the hands of the Persians, and they welcomed him as their own. They gave him command of their troops, and every time he fought against Persian forces, those forces conveniently fled, exactly as Darius had ordered. Zopyrus rose in Babylon's ranks until he had full trust. Then he threw the gates wide open and the Persians marched in. Babylon basically fell because one man convinced an entire city that his wounds were real. 9. Pheidippides and the God Plan. The legend of Pheidippides, the runner from Athens, isn't just about endurance. It also has a solid dose of the supernatural. In 490 BCE, when the Persians landed at Marathon, Athens needed help fast. They sent Pheidippides to Sparta, a run of about 150 miles across rough terrain. He pushed himself as hard as he could. But somewhere in Arcadia, on Mount Parthenon, something strange happened. The goat-footed god Pan appeared, called him by name, and demanded to know why the Athenians ignored him when he had always been their friend. Pheidippides carried that message back to Athens, and people believed every word. After the Persians were defeated at Marathon, Athenians credited Pan with sowing panic among their enemies. To hold up their side of the bargain, they built him a shrine beneath the Acropolis and began offering sacrifices and torch races in his honor. So interestingly, the first Marathon run wasn't only about stamina, it was also a divine encounter that shaped Athenian religion. 8. Scaevola's Burning Hand. Gaius Mucius had one job: sneak into the Etruscan camp and kill King Lars Porsena, but he ended up stabbing the wrong man and getting arrested. Now, most people in that spot would have begged for mercy, not Mucius. While Porsena threatened him with torture, he calmly stuck his right hand into a fire burning on the altar next to him and let it burn to a crisp without flinching. That one act of defiance impressed the king so much that he let Mucius go, and from then on, the Romans called him Scaevola, which basically means left-handed. 7. The world's oldest ghost story. Okay, this one's not so much about a single person as it is what might be the oldest ghost story we've ever found. In 2021, Dr. Irving Finkel of the British Museum spotted a 3,500-year-old clay tablet that had been gathering dust for years. On it was a faint image of a ghost, a middle-aged woman being led away by a younger man back to the underworld. On the back were instructions for sending spirits back to where they belonged. The steps were simple, but incredibly creepy. You make 2 figurines, one male, one female, dress them and give them everyday items like a comb and a bed. At sunrise, you set out 2 vessels of beer, chant to Shamash, the Mesopotamian sun god, and guide the ghost away. It closes with a warning that's still effective thousands of years later. Do not look behind you. 6. Jael and the Tent Peg. Jael shows up only briefly in the Bible's book of Judges, but her deed made her stand out in history. In the story, we learn that the Jewish people were under the thumb of the Canaanites, led by their general, Sisera. After losing a major battle, Sisera fled on foot and stumbled straight into Jael's camp. She welcomed him warmly, telling him not to be afraid, covered him with a blanket, and even handed him milk to drink. Exhausted, he fell asleep. Jael made her move. Sympathetic to the suffering of the Jews, she grabbed a tent peg and drove it through Sisera's skull, killing him instantly. It was a direct violation of the ancient code of hospitality, the kind of act usually condemned. But to the Israelites, it was seen as divine justice. In fact, the Song of Deborah praises her directly. Extolled above women be Jael, extolled above women in the tent. 5. Telesilla of Argos. Telesilla grew up in Argos around 500 BCE and was a sickly child. She went to an oracle for advice and was told that she would be better off if she dedicated herself to the muses. So she turned to poetry. Telesilla became the most admired poet of her time. Pieces of her work actually survive to this day, which would have made this a great entry to our list. But it needs to be said that what's really kept her name alive wasn't her verses, it was what happened when Sparta came for Argos. The city's men had been massacred in battle, leaving Argos defenseless. Telesilla organized what was left. She had old men and slaves guard the walls, and armed the women with weapons and armor. Then, she led them to face the Spartans directly. The sight shocked the invaders to their core. If they beat women, there was no honor in it, and if they lost, the disgrace would be worse. They pulled back, and Argos was saved. Telesilla was eventually honored with a statue showing her casting her books aside and lifting a helmet. 4. Hydna. During Xerxes' invasion of Greece, the Persians had numbers, ships, and confidence. What they didn't count on was a father-daughter team of divers. Hydna, trained by her father Scilus of Scione, was famous for her skill in the water. When the Greek city-states were desperate for an edge, they turned to the pair. Under cover of darkness, Hydna and Scilus swam nearly 10 miles out to sea. Once there, they slipped beneath the enemy fleet and cut the anchors loose. By morning, the Persian ships were drifting helplessly, colliding and breaking apart on the rocks. The victory that followed was remembered not just for the armies on land, but for the divers who had sabotaged the fleet. Hydna and her father were honored with statues at Olympia for their bravery. Centuries later, when Emperor Nero raided the sanctuaries of Greece to decorate Rome, Hydna's statue was among the treasures he carried off. 3. Horatius Cocles at the bridge. Horatius Cocles was already half-blind from earlier battles, but when Rome needed someone to hold the line, he was the one who stepped in. The Etruscan king Lars Porsena was marching to put the Tarquins back on the throne, and the only thing between him and Rome was the wooden bridge across the Tiber. Along with 2 comrades, he held the narrow span against wave after wave of attackers while the Romans hacked at the bridge from behind. Spears struck him, swords pressed in, but he didn't yield. When the timbers finally gave way and the bridge collapsed into the river, his allies scrambled back to safety. Horatius, still in full armor and bleeding, dove straight into the Tiber. Against the current and his wounds, he swam for the Roman shore and made it. The Etruscans never made it across. 2. Alexander the Great and Diogenes. Conqueror of Greece, ruler of armies, master of half the known world, Alexander the Great wasn't used to being brushed off. But in Corinth, he came across someone who couldn't care less who he was. The philosopher Diogenes of Sinope lived in a giant clay jar, owned almost nothing, and thought wealth was a joke. When Alexander went to meet him, Diogenes was sprawled out in the sun. Surrounded by guards and courtiers, the young king leaned in and offered him anything he wanted. Diogenes didn't even sit up. He just told Alexander to move out of the way. The king was blocking his sunlight. The entourage laughed, expecting outrage, but Alexander admitted he was impressed. He even told his men that if he couldn't be Alexander, he'd want to be Diogenes. Alexander realized that the only man richer than him was the one who wanted nothing. 1. An octopus from the sewers. Most people worry about spiders or rats turning up where they shouldn't, but the Romans had a far stranger tale to tell. Arion, the same Roman writer who gave us the story about the boy and his dolphin friend, claimed that fish merchants in the 2nd or 3rd century CE in Carteia, a Roman colony in southern Spain, kept losing their stock and couldn't figure out how. The doors of their homes were locked, the walls were intact, and yet whole jars of fish kept going missing. Suspicious, they left a guard on duty overnight and discovered the culprit. It was a giant octopus. It came slithering up through the sewers and was strong enough to pry open storage jars and feast. The poor guard froze, unwilling to face the thing alone. So the next night, reinforcements lay in wait. When the octopus returned, they blocked its escape route, hacked at its tentacles, and killed it on the spot. Pliny's version raised the stakes even higher. His octopus didn't sneak through drains. It came straight out of the sea and dragged itself onto land to raid the fish ponds until the dogs were unleashed on it. Which probably just goes to show that the ancient Romans weren't imagining krakens out on the horizon, they thought they had them at home. And that's a wrap. But since, I name-dropped Herodotus more than once, let's end with him. He didn't just write about kings and battles. He filled his histories with some pretty unbelievable claims too. So, what did he say was living in the desert near India? Was it A, giant scorpions, B, serpents with wings, C, fire-breathing lizards, or D, gold-digging ants? Type your answers in the comments below, and while you're at it, tell me what kind of stories you would like to see next. Oh, and one more thing. If you enjoyed today's list, well, you've got to watch our related video, 25 Modern Wonders with Ancient Echoes. It shows how ancient genius still shapes the modern world, from California offices designed after the Tree of Life to China's new high-tech Silk Road. That link will show up right here in just a second. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell, and I'll catch you guys again next time. See ya.